Obviously, rural areas that have less stations are going to have more opportunity. Sacramento definitely does have some stations. Now, when we throw out a number like 10, we're talking about the Sacramento market. So how many, if any of those, will be in the city of Sacramento, which has a fairly dense radio market, or, you know, in some of the urban areas?
Does anyone not know what a market is? Does anyone raise your hand? You don't have to be shy.
You want to do market?
Everyone knows?
No.
Oh, you don't know? Okay.
Do market.
Okay, well, the FCC divides the entire country into what's called media markets. They're divided into sections, and that's not necessarily based on a city. Like Sacramento itself doesn't have a box drawn around it that says Sacramento market. It's based on the population. So the Sacramento market could be not even around Sacramento specifically, but it's an area. Am I explaining this to some degree? Yeah. So the Sacramento market could cover, you know, Roseville also, or whatever, but that's the market, and you get a certain number of frequencies per market, basically.
So we may go, Sacramento has 10, and it sounds super cool, but actually Roseville has 5 of those. So the city of Sacramento may only have a couple. There probably will be a couple within the city, but there will be a lot more in, say, Roseville and Fairfield and a couple outside.
But if you did Roseville, could you reach Sacramento?
How far is Roseville?
It's a 3 to 10 mile radius, so I'm not sure how far it is.
Probably not.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
I don't think so. Todd, if we miss any technical notes, you can certainly jump in as well. So a couple of those things in terms of distance and stuff haven't been determined yet, which is why you need to start paying attention now. This is the preliminary check at this website, and I can actually send this PowerPoint to individuals here if they want this information. If you go to the PrometheusRadio.org, you can link through to a lot of these things we're looking at in terms of what the original understanding at this point is of availability in different markets. Beth is open to actually having a conversation as well about different markets. There definitely will be some here, as we know. The exact number is not clear. In any case, you probably want to get an engineer in terms of looking at specifics of a situation. You know, if you go off this hill, at this height, at this wattage, what will you reach? How much interference will that be? We have other stations in the neighborhood. You, at some point during the process, you will have to get an engineer, and I'm sure Todd can help with access to people like that. I don't know who the Sacramento market has, in terms of doing a deeper analysis, a more specific analysis. Okay, this is, you know, sort of what's important. We know there's things available here, and what's the process of actually applying? Or more importantly, what's the process of being prepared to apply? What happens is sometime next year, the FCC opens up what's called a window. Some people prefer to call it like a crack in a window. But it's a fairly limited period of time where they go, starting now, you can apply, you've got 3 minutes, or 2 weeks, or whatever it is. It's often fairly limited. I'm not sure, what was it last time? Do you remember?
5 days.
5 days.
Wow.
So you need to be ready on day 1. You know, day 1 is too late to call the engineer. So having the preparation is really what this meeting is about, what this PowerPoint is about. So certain things you need. You need a nonprofit status. You do not have to be an official 501c3 financially. You have to be a recognized nonprofit. Schools, local governments, community organizations, any of those is appropriate. The board must live within 30 miles of the transmitter. You should be prepared to broadcast. So at this point, we're just talking about the application process. This is the paperwork you're putting through. Anything can change in the 3 years after that while you're putting your radio station together. On that piece of paper, you better say you're broadcasting 5 hours a day. Then within that, you know, they look for history. They like organizations have existed for a period of time. Collaboration can be very important. Collaboration is also important in terms of content development. Not all organizations are ready to start a radio station. Most of those organizations would love to have access to a station that they can put a show So one thing that's important is developing your schedule in terms of what you're going to be presenting to the FCC. So even organizations that are not ready to have a radio station, give them an hour in your schedule in your application. It shows collaboration, it shows content, it shows local hours. Anything can change in the 3 years after you get that when you actually start. What you need to be able to do is tell the FCC you're ready to give the local community a voice. Then there's the whole points thing, which includes history and hours, as Beth was talking about. You know, they like 12 hours a day, and I think they like 5 hours of local.
Yeah, and it's, and 2 years of having existed as
Right,
an
I think you
entity.
have to have at least 2 years of existence as a primary organization. Each organization can have one license.
It doesn't have to exist for 2 years, but that gets you extra points.
Right, it's all about the points.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, there's organizations here, the SAC Peace Center's been around for a while, I believe. I mean, you've got some organizations with history. And then if you connect up with something like Access Sacramento, they can say, we've had an internet stream for so long. That shows preparation and readiness to get on the air as well. You can actually start developing internet streams just to start developing voice. I mean, a couple of the other organizations I've talked to giving this presentation, they're like, well, okay, maybe 2 or 3 years from now we'll get the station, but we want to be ready to go on the air when we get it. How do we do that? One way to prepare to that is to have an internet stream. Start doing podcasting. Start streaming through Live 365. Then you start developing people with a voice, you start developing content, you start developing connection to the local community. You're more prepared for the application and actually to go on the air when you finally start. Cost. This was, I think, raised earlier. It's very varied. If you've got a gorgeous space already that has some rooms, you know, you're safer. It can be anywhere to 10 to 25,000. You're not paying for the application. Engineering you will probably pay for, unless Todd knows some people who are cheap or free in the area. I don't know who the engineers are around here. The studio equipment, again, it could be anywhere from anywhere. $5,000 to start with in terms of the board, and the transmission equipment and everything. The more you can get donated, you know, if there's local radio stations that are upgrading and getting rid of equipment, you know, making connections to them can be really important. If some of the local schools have audio equipment that they're upgrading from, starting to put the word out, starting to develop that is also really important, because that's going to be a serious cost when you get to that point. Those are the upfront costs to opening. After opening, you've got potentially rent, unless you have an organization that has space that can be donated as part of it. It's generally volunteer run. You know, these are not corporate stations, primarily volunteer driven. You then have some content licenses. This is not pirate radio. This is FCC approved, federally licensed radio broadcast. That means you're following under legal standards of broadcast, which raises issues of copyright in terms of playing music. I mean, the copyright costs are a lot less than for a full power station, but you do have specific costs around that in terms of legal licensing, and then potentially maintenance of office and studio equipment. Right now, we're expecting the finalization of the FCC standards. Hopefully by December, they'll answer a few questions to allow the engineers to be specific about the needs. Sometime as soon as June of next year, it's not entirely clear, the window will open. You want to start doing your prep now so that when the window opens, you've got the paperwork. You do not wait until next June to start preparing the application. After they're awarded, you have up to 3 years to actually build it. So you don't have to be like totally ready the moment the window happens or the application gets approved. You have 3 years to finish your funding, develop your location, start building your transmitter, whatever you need to do to actually start broadcasting.
A question for you. You mentioned applications due summer 2012, and then the awards made, you have almost a year's time. What's typical for, or is
Do you
it?
have any idea, Todd?
It's probably faster now, but back in 2000, it took like 3 years before we got a permit. And the reason it took so long is because the engineers didn't know what public access television station was, so they thought there was a problem. So
You're saying FCC took 3 years?
the FCC took 3 years, but that is not the case anymore. It's probably like a year. What do you think?
They're going to have thousands of applications from all across the country they're going to have to go through.
Yeah.
So it's just going to take them time to get through
If
it.
your application is not buttoned up tight, then you get stuck in another pile, and you just want to be in the pile that they go through faster than the piles that they don't go through faster.
Right. So you just have to hit those points is probably the first thing they're going to look at. And the people with the most points, they get to the first pile, then the other one, whenever, pretty much. So essentially it's about preparation. Obviously money is an issue. You know, you want to fundraise, have a goal, start to look into who the local lawyers are that care about this stuff. Start to connect with an engineer and start doing specific analysis. Once the FCC comes out in the next couple months of what their standards are, what are the places around here that would be good for transmitters, what are the frequencies available in the given areas within the market, and then developing your proposal and paperwork and point system. PrometheusRadio.org. I just want to start a station. If you just go to PrometheusRadio.org, the front page is pretty clear on how to link through to wherever you need to get through. In fact, if you go to the, is the Radio Summer link still up
Yeah, the
there?
Radio Summer, it's
At the
just
Radio
more
Summer-
just radiosummer.org.
Yeah, the radiosummer.org has a lot of information about the process, working towards it, how to develop collaboration, how to start to work within a group to develop the thought process around what a low power station can have. And it's really helpful in terms of sort of building your organization in collaboration towards the application. There's a lot of really helpful information there. Jeff is their national organizer, who I've worked with a little bit over the summer. He's certainly open to helping as well. Prometheus has historically offered as much support as possible in terms of organizations working towards LPFM, up to and including, actually they've done a series of barn raisings where they actually help with the technology of building it, bringing in people from all over the country. They won't be able to do that for everybody.
Yeah, I'll explain a little bit about barn raising just in case none of everyone knows. In Pennsylvania, it's like a Dutch country, so they have these events that are based on this Amish tradition of raising a barn up in like 2 days. So like you get like
You've all seen Seven Brides for Seven Brothers?
they get like 100 people, everyone camps out, everyone builds a station in like a matter of 2 days, and everyone works together, stays up all night, does all that kind of stuff. And that doesn't happen everywhere, but
No, it doesn't happen.
obviously.
I'm not guaranteeing it.
Not guaranteeing anything, but it's really fun.
It is a lot of fun.
Um,
That was sort of how I first connected with Prometheus. I did one in North Carolina. It was actually that one, the Malcolm X organization in North Carolina. There's like a 4-day barn raising where you actually, there's a series of workshops training local people on how to do radio, as well as actually building the transmitter, putting up the antenna, running all the technology, and then at the end of it, actually going on the air and opening
Yeah,
up.
and your first broadcast. And they well, one in Washington State, I believe, I forget where it was, but they had a completely
yeah.
bilingual barn raising where everything was done in both Spanish and English, and like 100% bilingual, so that was really a cool idea.
Yeah, I don't know if I brought the documentaries actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
This is a question, I guess, about the political times, like when KDRT and some of the other stations you said in the past, the last window, and this radio station, the Malcolm X station applied. That was one kind of political milieu. We're in another one now.
That's true.
And do you have a sense of who is in the decision-making seat for these, and whether
His name is
they're...
Julius.
Well, I shouldn't speak too much to it because I'm not totally, but FCCs, well, let me back up real quick. Back then, since you were referring to those, this opportunity was shut off before the LTFM service was, would be fully implemented, the opportunity was shut off by broadcast industry. And so that was in it. So places like Davis, there was one channel. Places like, outside of Portland, there was one channel. But places like Sacramento, there was 12 applications, they were all shut down. Just not available anymore. Now, with getting this act passed, with Prometheus getting this act passed, now there's an opportunity to where places like Sacramento has channels that will be available. Places like Sacramento, if everything goes right.
Well, it was more, my
So-
question was more like whether or not there's 12 available. Could somebody say, geez, they look like they're terrorists, so we don't want to have a terrorist radio station in Sacramento, so that's the end of
The
their.
FCC is pretty good at not ignoring what the organization does.
Which can be bad and good, but yeah, they can't decide whether or not you're a terrorist, or there's no political decision made from their standpoint where they could be sued.
I mean, that's why the point system is sort of there, okay, rather than looking into what this organization does, they go, how long have they existed? What history of transmission do they have? What are they offering in terms of local voice? And I think there's an attempt to make it as objective as possible. Speaking as a teacher, obviously there's no objectivity, but they try to. We're also looking at what's allegedly a Democratic FCC. I mean, a lot of that back then was under Republican FCC as well. So now we're dealing with, Julius Janikowski and Adelstein and what's her name?
I think one thing though, who will be looking at your application is the competitors. And they're the ones who will try to pick things apart, maybe even more so than the FCC, as far as filing petitions to stop your application. They may look at some of the things you say and use those as excuses.
Other low-power people are your competitors or commercial?
Southern Low Power.
And churches, I mean.
Just, just organizations like the ones that are applying are no commercial.
And
So that's basically the overall introduction.
any questions about that?
So, I'm just trying to picture this in my mind. At some point, you have to build like a 25-foot tower. If it was right here, do we need to go in the back and build a 25-foot tower?
Todd, do you want to respond to that?
You'll need to put up something on top of a roof.
100 is actually the number you'll usually use instead of 25, but.
I mean, you can put it on another building somewhere, or if there's a tower nearby, you can co-locate it there and put a link between the studio and that tower.
Is it harmful for people? I just don't know. The radio waves don't.
No, it's high enough that it's not harmful.
It doesn't have to be right here. I mean, there's ways to either link through cable or through microwave or some other things in terms of sending a signal to the transmitter from your home base. But it's really about height related to what the geography of the area is.
Does the city and the county regulate as well, or is it just that?
That's gray area at times. Sometimes you'll need a building permit to put up like a tower or something, but if you're co-locating on something else that's already there, no. Sometimes people have ham antennas, in the backyard on a tower, and sometimes the local governing agency that's in charge of looking at that stuff just looks past it. So,
I understand, for example, in Davis, they were going to site a cell phone tower
Yeah.
recently, and there was a lot of concern about that in neighborhoods. And essentially it got trumped, I guess, by some regulation or some existing rule that said that the local authorities don't have any jurisdiction, so nobody could do anything. It just was gonna, they could put a lot of heat on by the community just making a noise. But
So there were cell phone tower moratoriums, and we ran up against that. That's no longer really the case because there was a time frame on that where local municipalities could only stop cell phone towers for a certain amount of time. Then they required rules. So they just had infinite rules, and I don't know about Sacramento, but that could be an issue out here as far as building a new tower or putting something on a roof. And we had to so that could be an issue.
Can I ask a quick question? Does anyone object to having